Okay, Jeff again for the Learning Dutch, and now I'm going to explain a few about the different levels of linguistics. And this is important to be able to understand so that when you learn quickly, you can know kind of the different types of areas of linguistics. And when you begin to learn the language or figure it out and describe it, you need to break down all these different things, and that's why I had to approach it this way to learn it really fast. So we already talked about the phonetics and phonology, and let's consider them the same thing when you're learning a language, a specific language. Okay, phonetics just if you're learning, trying to learn the sounds of any language, but when you're applying to a specific language, they're going to call it phonology. So I was figuring out the phonology of Dutch, right, with the phonetic characters and all that. Um, then then what I had to explain to my language instructor, who is not a language teacher, okay, the person is just my native, we usually refers to as like an informant, a native language informant in linguistics. So that was my informant, but given that I was paying the person all that, the person considered herself to be an instructor, right? I mean, this is just, this is how we do this in our current way we do things, right? When you're learning language. This so then I explained to the teacher or to this native language informant that just to understand why she could not correct me and things, because it's possible to see some of the sounds, right? And the sounds may have a meaning in a different place, in a different word, in the language. And that was important to break all this down. So the phonology, one thing, and then once you go beyond phonology, which is phonetics is just sounds, right? And then when you go to phonology of a language, you're making sure that the sounds have meaning in that language. They apply to a meaning of some word in the language, and that's why you have these minimal pairs I explained, right? All those words usually have a meaning, and each time you pronounce the word, you apply to a word an item, an object, or something that has meaning, right? It means something in the language. You don't want to just find sounds that could exist. You want to find ones that do exist, and you want to have as many of these minimal pairs to help establish that. Okay, that's where meaning comes into place at a very minimal word level. Okay, and at the word level, it's important to understand that there's kind of the basic root of a word, a stem, and you have what's called morphology. And morphology is these beginnings or endings, or sometimes it can be in the middle of a word. You have these we in a lot of language have endings, right? We call them suffixes. It's at the end. They're called affixes in general, where you place them in places, right? They can be at the beginning, middle, or end of the word, or whatever. But usually have a lot of these at the end of words. We sometimes call these conjugations or declensions in some languages, okay, for verbs and nouns and all that stuff. But these endings, sometimes it can be the beginning of the word, like the word prefix, postfix. Those are an example of a prefix because it goes before. I'm giving you the word the prefix that means the prefix, right? But postfix is also a prefix in the meaning that you have this word this thing is at the beginning of the word, right? So there are lots of in some language. Sometimes you might have them at the beginning of words, and a lot of languages have the end of language, especially European language have the end of words. And you have a lot of these that actually happen in the middle of words in some languages. And this can happen a lot with vowels and things. In a lot of languages, they have like consonant triads. So we can have like Arabic or Hebrew or language have these triads, and you can use things that you might be able to insert in the middle of. I'm trying to give an example. It's not necessarily these are not so infixes, not necessarily that, but I'm just kind of giving an idea how this could work, right? But you might insert the middle. But I was trying to figure out first, what are the endings, right? Where are the approaches where you have endings of words? Now, I wonder how complex that is. Now, this is important just because you're moving away from phonology, pure phonology, just knowing, and you want to know now how can when I want to construct sentence utterances, okay, phrases, sentences, whatever you want. Sentence is usually a written thing, right? We call it back in honor. So I get the noise here, but in utterance is usually what you pronounce, right? So now I'm learning this for survival Dutch, right? So I consider these to be utterances. But I want to figure out if this is, if a language has a lot of suffix at the end, they're at the end of the word or at the beginning of the word, in the middle of the word. I'm assuming they're at the end of the word just because of general knowledge. And Dutch is a Germanic language, and I do know German. So that helped a bit and that hurt because German is actually a very phonetic, pronounced language. It's really easy if you know what the letters are, you know what they are, then you can always pronounce them pretty much the same, right? Now Dutch is not that way. Dutch is really different in the sense there are a lot of vowels, and the actual writing is very different compared to the spelling of it is compared to how you pronounce it. There's a lack of correspondence, so it makes it kind of complicated. So to learn quickly, okay. I mean, children, but actually the children actually have a lot. I've heard from a lot of adults now that the children have a lot of difficulty learning how to read and write the language. It's quite difficult for them because of these correspondences that don't make sense. Okay, at least until you've mastered it at a certain point of time, which can be late. But so what was important here is I want to figure out where these endings or beginnings are, these words are, and I want to construct sentences. And when you construct sentences, you're going to take verbs. Sorry, I got all this noise here, but I'm in a restaurant, so look at here. So they make it about a noise here, but they're just picking up the stuff. So what was important then was to begin to build sentences, right? It's like playing Legos or playing Tetris, or Tetris. So you want to be able to build these things and say, like I would sometimes, I want to buy a Christmas tree and a Christmas ornament, and I want a blue Christmas tree, and I want a green Christmas tree, and I want a red Christmas tree, and I want 3 Christmas trees, and I want 2 Christmas trees, and I want 1 Christmas tree. I would like 1 Christmas tree and 2 Christmas tree brown ornaments, right? And a blue Christmas tree. So what you do is begin to construct these things with these different words and kind of bring them. This is where the numbers are important. And this is where you figure out how to say the plural, the singular and the plural things, and how do you combine these things. And you're going to get this combination, what's called the morphologies, these endings or beginnings, they're going to be there and they're going to appear, right? And they're going to have different pronunciations. So this helps you kind of figure it out, right? So that was kind of the next step. And then I had explained to her that once you go beyond the morphology, that's a very specific word for the creation of words, forming these words. What happens when you begin to build these blocks of each of these individual words and then put them into a sentence or an utterance, then we're going to talk about syntax. And the usual word for syntax in the normal thing, we call it grammar. Okay, grammar is the whole sentence with, it's grammatically correct, we say, but it's usually we have to distinguish between things are syntactically correct. That's the grammatical, the structure of it. But you get the phonology of it, the pronunciation aspects, and you get some of the other things. So I had explained these different types of things now to her. And then I said we need to think about the pragmatics, which is this speech. We talked about speech acts, and speech acts are like greetings. You have this back and forth ping pong between 2 people or 3 people, and we call this pragmatics. And so there are things you say usually in a greeting back and forth. Hello, what's your name? How are you? All these things. This is pragmatics, and speech acts is one of those things. And so sometimes there are things that are appropriate to say, and some things that are not appropriate to say. So I kind of had to figure that out too, right? And some of these appropriate and inappropriate things to say are how formal or informal you need to be. And I wanted to stay as formal as I can because I need to learn informal in just 1 week, right? I need to learn how to buy things. Remember, my goals are to buy things. To order things, buy things. I'm going to stay in a formal context as much as I can. So I need to know how to say the formal forms, if there are formal forms, or if there's something to say that's most generic that applies 80% of the time. If there's things that you can say in a family and all that, or just to good friends and that kind of content, I don't really care because my need is survival, right? It's to survive and go out. It's not to spend time with the family, right? So that's where kind of the pragmatic aspects come to things. Then there might be some social aspects in sociolinguistics. We'll talk about that. And those are like, I have to worry about that. So this is where this gets into the thing of like the honorifics. Do you say this to the king or the queen or to the prime minister? How formal do you get? Sometimes there are very formal forms and all that. And that even gets on the border of sociolinguistics more than pragmatics. Then you get into semantics. And I had explained this to her so she would understand when to correct me and when not to, right? So when there are times you can use words not. So I'll give an example here of one that I had explained is semantics is you may have some words that have meanings. How close is it to another word or not? So what's the difference between a seat and a chair and a stool and a bench and uh, a armchair and a sofa and a couch and a bed, right? So all these things, they all have a lot of similar traits, but they all have added on traits and all that. And my goal in this was to always find the most commonly used word that I needed that could apply in all situations. I don't really want to learn in 1 week the difference between chair and seat and all that. I want to just learn the word seat. That's going to, the equivalent of the word seat that can be used in a lot of different contexts. And it doesn't matter. If I say, I want to sit in the seat, would you come please in the seat that has 2 arms on it? Would you please, this is the seat in the train, this is a seat in the car, this is a seat in a house, this is a seat. Now, we wouldn't usually word use the seat, right? Because you have very specific words depending which type of seat you're sitting on, right? Which might be a chair or a stool, all that. But if I use the word seat, you understand what I'm saying, right? In all contexts. So that's what I was always looking for, is what's the most generic form, the most generic word I can use in the most of the time. That helps you do survival Dutch, right? So again, I was trying to do this in 1 week. So this is kind of my approach to it. There are no errors. They're just approximations that are closer or not. And again, I always had to remind her to not correct me unless I was swearing or saying something vulgar or something I should not say, right? But the rest of the time, don't correct me, and then we'll forget the last. So that worked out pretty well. So we'll go on to the next video of some other things we did.